I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. In October of 1985, a woman named Cherie Warren left work at a busy Salt Lake City office
to meet her estranged husband at a downtown auto dealership.
She never made it home. Cherie's car surfaced weeks later in Las Vegas.
In the parking lot of a hotel casino.
No one knows how it got there.
Strange. It was strange.
Both Cherie's estranged husband and her boyfriend raised suspicion for investigators.
I kind of thought that he might have done something.
But no arrests were ever made. In Cold Season 3, we dig into double lives, make new connections in the case, and examine the difficulty raised by reasonable doubt.
We want answers just as much as anyone else.
They have creeps like that now too, so nothing's changed.
That's the new Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, now available anywhere you get your podcasts.
In today's episode of Project Recovery, what are some of the things that you found during this last month?
My first thought when I found out the day it happened was why. He went from like an amazing day with all of his friends and his girlfriend to I'm going to end my life.
Make sure you listen to the end. Find us on Facebook at Project Recovery. We'll have that and much more coming up. Welcome to Project Recovery, a podcast about addiction. More importantly, it's about recovery. And it's brought to you by our friends at useonlyasdirected.org. They got a 3-part solution for the opioid epidemic. It's speak out, opt out, and of course, throw out. I am Casey. That's Dr. Matt. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Hey, we got a great guest today. His name is Josh, and he's raw, he's real, and he's here to talk about his son, who he lost to suicide no more than 3 weeks ago. And it's National Suicide Awareness Week, so we're going to talk about that. We're going to get to him in just a second. But I got to say, today we recorded, it's on a Thursday.
Right.
And this is officially my 2-year anniversary. This is my sober birthday.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thank you guys, man. I appreciate it. And
it's a big deal.
Yeah, but you know, and I'm not saying that to get the accolades and the compliments, because I posted something on Facebook and was overwhelmed with support and kindness, and I have so much gratitude for everybody who's helped me along the way in this journey. The reason that I wanted to post it is because throughout my whole recovery and this journey, I've wanted to be honest and upfront and let everybody know what's going along throughout the whole ordeal, just so they can see the highs, they can see the lows, they can see the milestones, the setbacks, and there's been some of those along the whole journey.
Right. 2 years, a lot happens in 2 years, right?
You know, and it's crazy to look at it in that kind of chunk, 2 years. You know, when you're in active addiction and your mind is all warped and you're not thinking clearly, 2 years seems like forever. It's like you can't even fathom 2 years. I mean, it seems like an eternity. But now sitting here on the day of my birthday looking back, it's been a whirlwind.
Has it gone faster than you thought?
It's gone faster, and I've been able to accomplish so much more than I ever even imagined possible. I mean, really, there was at times where I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if I'm, you know, and all I did was I'd get up every morning and just keep moving forward.
So you mean accomplishments like broadly in life. So you've accomplished your sobriety for these 2 years, but like you're talking about other stuff too?
Yeah, I mean... And I was talking to Rob Eastman, you know, our good friend Coach Eastman.
Yeah.
He's the one that brought Josh to us today, and we'll talk to him a little bit later on the podcast either. But we were riding the elevator up, and he was telling me, he was like, you know, how's it been? And to be honest with you, the easiest thing has been not drinking. I very rarely ever think about drinking.
Okay.
There's not been a moment that I've thought, you know what? F this, F you, F it all, give me a Bud Light.
Yeah, because you wouldn't choose Bud Light.
I would. That was my jam. I would have chosen a Bud Light and a tequila and a Mountain Dew chaser. I mean, that was my deal, you know. Yep. But I've never thought once that that's what I want to do.
Okay.
The problem is getting your life back.
So what do you mean? So the hard part's been making
amends.
Okay.
Proving your worth, and getting out there and just doing every day. because it was so easy when the world got complicated or somebody pissed me off to throw a pity party and reach for that Bud Light. That was the easy way out. Yeah. The hard way is to sit in your own stink and look at something and go, okay, how do I figure this out? How do I deal with this? Mm-hmm. And through the 2 years of recovery, my tool belt has gotten bigger because I go, okay, this is how I can deal with this. Or I need some time. I'm going to go to the gym and get my head right. Or I've got to just be honest and ask for help, which I was never good at because I was Casey. I got this. Even if I don't got this, it's going to work out.
Yeah. Well, I've been impressed that you were so – I knew it was hard for you, but people from watching you from the outside probably – couldn't tell because you kind of mask all that stuff with your jokes and your humor, but asking for rides. And we joked around about that a lot before you got your license back. But I knew that was hard for you. That was hard, wasn't it, asking people to drive you around?
I didn't want to depend on anybody. I didn't want to be a burden on anybody. And we joked about it, but our first 3 months of guests were all from Ogden because I could bum a ride from them.
Right, exactly.
You know what I mean? Yeah. There were so many times that we'd have guests on there, and I go, hey, which way are you going, Ogden? Hey, you mind if I get a ride?
Well, I've heard that before, though, because from the time we're 16 – we have that driver's license. We have that freedom. We start to take it for granted, but it becomes part of who you are, the freedom to get around and go places and do what you want. And when that's taken away, I've had other people who are in similar situations because of DUIs say, sort of almost embarrassed that that's one of the hardest things for them is to have that freedom. And then it affects all the other areas of life, your ability to work, your ability to see friends and family, all that.
I mean, I rode the bus. I spent $700 a month on Uber. I took my daughter's bike with a basket on it to get milk at 9 o'clock at night.
I wish we had a video of that.
I called my ex-wife for rides. I would ask neighbors. Mm-hmm. I mean, there were so many times that I'm walking home from Smith's to my house with bags, just hoping somebody would drive by and see me. And they would stop and go, hey, do you need a ride? And you know what I would have said?
What?
No, I got this.
Yeah? You didn't accept the ride?
No, I wanted to accept the ride, but I did want – that's just my pride going, no, I've got this. Yeah. And I also feel like the punishment's got to burn a little bit.
Well, actually, good old-fashioned behaviorism in psychology will tell you that a punishment isn't a punishment if it doesn't hurt in some way.
Yeah.
Like if it doesn't inconvenience you. So we as parents, for example, hand out punishments all the time, and the kid looks at you and he's like, yeah, okay, whatever. That's not a punishment because it didn't sting, right? And so you're right. If it doesn't sting, it doesn't matter, and if it doesn't matter, then you aren't going to change.
And throughout my life, my personality, my wit, even my charm to some extent, had got me out a lot of trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Where I should have.
Golden tongue.
Yeah, I mean, I really did. And so, I'm still going down to the jail twice a day to blow to get my license. I have a breathalyzer in my car that I have to breathe in.
How much longer is that?
12 days.
Only 12 more days?
12 days,
right.
yeah.
Cool.
It's going to be cool.
Are you going to miss all your buddies down there?
You know what? I'm going to miss them.
I know. I'm sure
I go in there and I talk to them, and everybody's good. There's a girl named Smokey Eyes. I probably should say their names.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think Smokey Eyes is her real name. So
no.
I think we're okay.
But I go, hey, Smokey Eyes. She goes, hey, Smiley. And I go, hey, what's going on? But it's cool. So I am grateful to be where I am. I actually was talking to a friend the other day, and he goes, so what are you going to do when this is done? Are you going to have a beer again? And I go, I don't think so.
What do you mean when this is done? What's done?
When I'm done blowing and that kind of stuff. He goes,
okay.
Are you going to have a beer again? And I go, I don't think so. He goes, come on, man, you can tell me. And I go, no. It's not in my plan. And I even was talking to my dad on the way down here because we got the same sober birthday because he quit when I did.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And there's nothing out there right now that makes me think that a beer would help me in any shape, way, or form.
Well, it doesn't help you, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
And I'm having just as much fun as I ever have. And
you remember it now.
I remember it.
Yeah.
And I got my relationship back with my kids.
Yeah.
I've got a better relationship with my ex-wife. Mm-hmm. My family trusts and believes in me now. My girlfriend's amazing. I mean, I'm surrounded by so many people who love me. And sometimes I go, why me? What did I do to deserve this? And I don't have the answer for that.
Oh,
but
There's something. What have you done to deserve that?
Got sober?
I think yes, but I think that you worked hard. You worked it. You did it. You've run an honest program since you came out of there. You've done what you said you were going to do, and you continue to do what you say you're going to do. And to me, that's the key to building trust and having loving, close relationships with people.
But I feel bad because I'm just doing what I should have been doing all along.
Right. But I mean, when we do what we should do, there's a reward, there's a payoff.
Yeah.
And I really feel like in some ways it's as simple as that. If you can get up in the morning and say you're going to do things and do them, you endear people to you, people trust you, and the good things of life happen. Even though you'll have ups and downs like everybody else, I would say it's not. I guess I jumped on that a little bit because I hear that a lot, like, oh, why do I deserve this? And it's like, well, partly because you're a human being who's doing what you should be doing. Yeah. And I think we all deserve good things when we're putting good things out there. So I'm proud of you, and I want you to feel like you can celebrate this, because I think that you celebrate it as part of the process of your life, not as an outcome. It's 2 years, and this friend of yours is thinking in outcome terms. Mm-hmm. Oh, when you're finished blowing and you get your license back, that's an outcome. And he's thinking, so then we're done. And I think we have to look at it, the bigger picture. You're always becoming who you are until you stop breathing, until you're done.
Love it.
And in that process, we need little celebrations along the way to reinforce the good things we're doing. So I hope you celebrate it this week and enjoy it and feel good about it, and then realize you just got to keep going.
Yep, Diet Mountain Dew and Swedish Fish. Here I come.
Right. I almost brought you some today, but I was running late.
That's my jam. Hey, we've got a guest today who's got an amazing story that he's willing to come and share, so soon after the suicide. Josh, how are you?
I'm doing all right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me out.
We lost your son, Brock, about a month ago.
Yeah, it'll be 4 weeks Saturday.
Before we find out more about that, why don't you set up kind of, your family situation, your life, and kind of set the scene for everybody?
Sure. So he's got two other brothers. Brock's 16. He's got a little brother, 14, and then another brother that's 10. His parents and I, or my ex-wife, were divorced. And so we got divorced about almost 10 years ago, separated at least. And then, so I would say, like, from any divorced family, there's always concern about your kids, how they perceive the two of you. Obviously, they've seen arguments here and there, and that's we kind of went our different ways. And so growing up with the kids, watching them grow up, seeing things that were a little bit concerning, I guess you could say, as any parent would do, you ask them if they need anything, that kind of thing. But, for the most part, they had pretty normal lives. Brock was an athlete. The other two boys are both in sports as well. He was very well liked, through elementary school, ran for a student body officer. He always had friends around him. When he got into junior high, he played baseball all through elementary, and then in through junior high, I coached him. And then he went into wrestling after that and struggled his first couple of years with Coach Eastman. And then his third year, 9th grade, killed it. He really struggled the first 2 years, didn't really do that well. But then the last year, waited till the last minute, Brock fashion. The day before his first match, it was like, hey, Mom, Dad, I need a medical physical tomorrow. I'm going to wrestle. And I was like, okay, you didn't go to any practices. So that first match, I'm in the stands hoping that this is going to go well, because this could be devastating to a kid. And
you're just hoping that, he shows up a little bit and just
exactly
doesn't roll over.
So we get there, his first match, it's a girl. I'm thinking, oh, great.
Wait a second.
Not to jump on the bandwagon
really
of feminists.
But the boys and girls wrestle each other nowadays?
Yeah, apparently so.
Really?
Yeah.
I actually did not know that.
How dated of you.
I'm an old guy. Yeah. I don't think we did that in Morgan back in the day.
No, just not on a mat.
Yeah, that was when he took the match, and Rob told him, he's like, you just got to think of her as another guy. And anyways, he went out there and pinned her, and it was in the first round. So it was big relief, he didn't lose that one, first one out, to be beat by a girl, that could have been pretty traumatic for him, I'm sure, in front of the school. But ended up taking first in district, second in region.
Awesome.
So he like smashed it.
Wow.
Yeah, did really well.
Let me ask you this, because I've got 3 kids myself, and I come from I'm divorced, and you know there's the dual families.
All the divorced guys in the room, raise your hand. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, Josh isn't even married yet. 50% of us end up getting divorced. When you get married, they should ask you, "Are you smarter than Einstein?" Because Einstein got divorced. You know what I'm saying? But when you would talk to your son, and I do this with my kids as well. Oh, I'm just seeing a picture of him now. What a good looking. And that's a cowboy right there. That guy looks like he goes to Morgan.
He looks like a wrestler.
Yeah.
Good-looking boy.
But when you ask him, how are you doing? Because I do that to my daughter all the time. How are you doing? She's always like, I'm good, Dad. And I go, is there anything you want to talk about? She's no.
Right.
And then how do you know when to push more, Dr. Matt? I mean, that's
part of your parental intuition, I guess. I would say it sometimes starts with the question. Tell me about how you're doing probably is going to get you a little bit farther with a kid than how are you doing, because an open-ended versus a closed-ended question. Yeah. But I think a lot of times it's hard. It's hard for me. I have people have mixed, impressions of like what it must be like at my house since I'm a psychologist. And like, it's not really any different than any other dad, trying to talk to their kids.
So when you asked Brock, how's he doing? What was his response?
So that was a good thing. I mean, his mom is like 101 questions, and so I always kind of knew like we talk a lot. It's a very amicable relationship, so we were always talking to each other about our kids' state of mind and stuff like that. And Brock was definitely, we were concerned, but when you would ask him, it was always, I'm good, Dad. Do you need anything? No, I'm good.
Yeah,
and he was busy. Like, he always stayed busy. That was the thing. Like, he wasn't. When we talk about mental illness or depression, like the first thing that comes to my mind would be he sleeps a lot, or he's staying inside. He's not really socializing.
Seems to have a black cloud always following him.
Yeah, and that was not him at all. Like, this kid was nonstop. Like, if he was sitting for more than 20 or 30 minutes, it was like something was wrong, because otherwise he would just be out. Like, let's go do something.
And that's I'm glad you brought that up. That's a stereotype that I think we need to mature past and understand depression in more depth. Certainly some people who are depressed have those typical symptoms that we can see, stay in bed, crying, moody, withdrawal, all of that. But one thing for people who are listening today to understand is that men or males tend to have more of an irritable depression a lot of the time. And the way that boys and men deal with their depression often is through being more active. And so that one's a tough one to identify. Just because someone's active doesn't mean they're depressed. So we have to look beyond just those typical obvious clinical symptoms, because sometimes the way especially guys deal with depression is to be busy and to be tinkering and to be moving and to be doing things because they feel irritated inside and they're trying to kind of work that through. And then with adolescents, it's really hard. They don't really have the emotional vocabulary. They don't have much life experience and know how to really express it, because to them it may not feel like depression because they've been fed that information of depression is sadness, and it's a lot more complicated than that.
A lot of times I'll be talking to my oldest daughter, and she'll start to cry. And I'll go, why are you crying? And she goes, I don't know, Dad. And I think that's what goes to speak of the emotional vocabulary.
Yeah.
She doesn't know how to express it. She doesn't know why, but she's just sad.
She just has those strong emotions.
And I try to always do that, but she's always busy too. And I'm not painting the picture. She's not always crying, but when she does, I go, why are you crying? She goes, I don't know, Dad. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's good. And so,
as parents, we just, it's a lot of educating, and that's why Suicide Prevention Week is a good opportunity for us all to talk about depression, suicide, and the moods that especially face our adolescents. They have a lot of challenges that we don't remember having, perhaps, or we don't see it because we're looking at it from an adult perspective.
And sometimes we're just different people and different personalities.
Sure.
You know what I mean? That it's like the stuff that was really affecting me as a child, my kids aren't into it, so it's not that big deal to them. And
different world in some ways.
Yeah, and I think that, to your point, though, like when kids, growing up, when we did, if you were crying, you had to have been hurt.
Yeah.
Like, why are you crying? Stop crying.
Yeah.
My dad said this more than once.
Yeah.
If you want to cry, I'll give you something to cry
Exactly.
about.
Or how about my favorite, is it bleeding?
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
No. So they look at you like, so what's the problem?
And that was
it
the
off.
thing. Like this kid, like if he emotionally, he was always crying. Like he was extremely emotional.
I think the younger generation is better in getting a broader emotional vocabulary than we ever had. Hey, we're talking to Josh today on Project Recovery about his son, Brock. And it is Suicide Prevention Week. If you know somebody or yourself need some help, here's the National Suicide Hotline. It's 1-800-273-8255. Project Recovery will be right back.
I'm Dave Cawley, investigative journalist and host of the podcast Cold. Don't miss Cold's new Season 3, where I look into the unsolved disappearance of Cherie Warren, a woman last seen leaving her job at a Salt Lake City office in 1985. Police cast suspicion on Cherie's estranged husband and boyfriend, but never made any arrests or recovered Cherie's remains. Find Cold Season 3, The Search for Cherie, anywhere you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to Project Recovery. Our guest today is Josh. Josh lost his son, Brock, a little over a month ago to suicide. And you were telling us something off air because I was giving everybody the National Suicide Hotline number, which is 1-800-273-8255. But you said there's a new number out?
So the new number is 877, just like you would call 911 in an emergency. So 877 is basically to replace that. So if you felt like you knew somebody or you were having a struggle on how to address somebody that is possibly suicidal, 877, it's an anonymous number. Or you are an anonymous person to give, somebody's information to them so that they can reach out to that person.
Why is anonymity important in that situation, you think, Dr. Matt?
Oh, especially in situations, let's say it's in the neighborhood or, Rob, Coach Eastman, let's say, people who work with kids, they may not want to ruffle the feathers or upset the parents. Well, I'm not 100% sure they're suicidal, which of course is the case almost all the time. And so sometimes people hesitate because they don't want to get, hurt feelings, ruffle feathers, be involved, be responsible. So there's lots of reasons. But as soon as you can have anonymity, then I think people are much more likely to talk and say what's on their mind.
I mean, I've seen enough after-school specials. I mean, to know that when somebody gets called out on having suicidal thoughts, they blame the person who called them out.
Yeah,
and
there can be some of that.
It's like, hey, look what you've done now. I mean, you've created more work for me. You've made my life worse because you've said these things out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, I want to come on to that. The one time that I've had an issue with this issue, a young man was telling his friends that he was suicidal. They didn't know what to do. They came to me. I went to him and the mother and said that he needed to go and seek a higher level of care. The stepdad doesn't believe in any of that. He went to the school, to all of that, got me banned from seeing his kid and all that. Like, there's a huge stigma around, like we talked about it. If you break your arm, you go get a cast, you wear it to school, and people sign it. If your mind's broken, you hide it. You don't let anybody know. You're ashamed of it. Like that's what needs to go. Like me seeking help for a young man got me blacklisted.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that's a perfect example of why an anonymous number is so valuable.
And you've also got the Safe UT app, which most kids should have on their phones.
They've promoted that well in the schools, but it's a great resource as well. So you can download that for free. Safe Utah UT app is another way to report and get advice and some help on things like mental health and suicide.
Well, and to that, like Brock, he had reached out to friends. Like there were a lot of people that he knew that he had talked about this to. Like his parents were the last people that found out.
And you found out, unfortunately, too late.
Yeah, exactly. And that, to your point about, shaming him, like he told his girlfriend, like consistently that these thoughts were happening and she never came to us. And he had actually told her, like she had asked, can I tell your parents? I need to talk to them about this. And he told her, do not tell my parents. So right there, that would have been a perfect time if she would have known, or one of his buddies, because they apparently knew too, that they could reach out, call this number, and it doesn't matter like where it came from, because at this point he's told who knows how many people, 10, 20, 30 people, anybody could call.
Dr. Matt, do you think when you hear a story like this, he's told his girlfriend, he told his friends, what do you think they're hoping he thinks will happen? Is it
what the person who's saying it?
Yeah.
What do they hope will happen? That's a great question. It could be a variety of things. I do think that some of those kids do want somebody to, even though they're saying, no, don't tell anybody, a big part of them wants help. And so they're hoping somebody will go against what they're saying and tell the parent or tell a teacher or something like that. I also know that when a person is struggling and having depression and having suicidal thoughts, it's like a pressure that builds up inside. And in some ways, we can measure it even physically. It's a real pressure that a person feels. And so talking is a pressure valve release, And so the more somebody's talking about that, the more they're struggling with that pressure and that discomfort of depression and suicidal thoughts. So it probably was serving both purposes, to tell his girlfriend and tell his buddies what was going on in his mind.
But I also think, and I know for myself when I was in my active addiction, I'm looking for, and I hope I'm using the right word, a commonality. I'm hoping to tell somebody something so they can go back a connection and go, I too am dealing with this. And so then now I've got somebody in arms with me that can help me go against this, because I'm sure Brock was talking to these guys and hoping that
somebody would relate to him,
and he wouldn't feel all alone. And I don't know Brock, but I'm assuming,
Well, and it must have been going on for a while before he started telling people, because adolescence is a time where you have strong thoughts and feelings, and you also have a naive perspective, so you feel like maybe nobody's ever felt this way, right? No one's ever been in love like I'm in love, or no one's ever been in pain like I'm in pain. But you're right, when you talk about it and you have somebody else say, oh man, I felt like that, ooh, that's a powerful thing, especially for an adolescent.
Well, I think that's why we get so connected to music sometimes, because you hear it in a song and the song's like, that's exactly how I feel. Right. This guy gets it.
Yeah.
Or this girl gets it.
And I would say, if there happen to be any teenagers or young adults out there listening, listen to what we're talking about. Your friends who are talking about their moods and thoughts of suicide, they really do need and want help.
And sadly, he had talked to people like over the last year.
Okay.
I mean, we've had multiple people now come out and say, Brock had said this like a year ago. Brock had said this, like, not just this girlfriend, but his ex-girlfriend and the one before that. Like, there has been multiple times over the course of the last few years that he had mentioned like some dark thoughts, whether it was suicide or just depression, and that he was, and they're trying to find that commonality.
This is such a common pattern or a common story. We hear this a lot, and that's why things like this Safe Utah app, or the 877 number, those things have been created precisely for this reason, because time and time again, adolescents, young adults, and adults, we find after the fact that they had been reaching out and they had been talking about it. But people have a stigma. There's a huge stigma still about mental health, and especially suicide. But there's also that, I think, tendency culturally to say, well, that's their business. I don't want to get involved. That someone else will help them, is kind of a diffusion of responsibility amongst friends. Well, I'm sure he's telling his girlfriend. I'm sure she knows, or girlfriend maybe think, well, somebody else knows. And the problem is then the people who survive their friend's suicide feel a tremendous amount of guilt and self-blame, which causes more depression for them. And we know that sometimes suicides within peer groups happen, and that can be one of the reasons that other kids become depressed and commit suicide as well.
That's when I talk to the youth, one of the number one things is loyalty. And I always tell them, a real friend doesn't keep those secrets. Mm-hmm. I went through that.
Real loyalty means you're going to take care of your friend.
You're going to do the hard thing, which is the right thing.
Yeah.
It's like, if you like that girl, cool, I'll keep that secret. If you're wanting to harm yourself or something, I'm going to tell on you because I love you.
Right. And that's it's hard for kids to kind of shift that thinking, but do you see them do that sometimes and kind of realize what you're saying?
Yeah. But I also see them kind of cower into that I want to fit in.
Right.
Because everybody's feeling
Nobody
they want
wants
to be
to
a
be
part
the
of something.
snitch,
And
right?
if I go and tell, I could lose all my friends.
Right.
But when you actually lose a friend, like I have to live with the regret. I buried my friend Danny Lowe when we were 19, and for a decade, I did the shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Yeah.
Did he tell me and we just drank it off? Did we tell me and we just smoked something to forget about it? And getting that phone call to where if I would have just told somebody how we really felt, that he could be sitting here with us right now.
Yeah.
So let's get back to Brock's story. So after his successful 9th grade year of wrestling, first in district, second in region, so he's 15 at this time?
So, yeah, he was 15, turned 16 in April. And went into high school last year, Bountiful High, and decided that he wasn't going to wrestle. And it kind of the last couple of years, I think that kids try to find their identity and where they fit in. And I'd kind of watched Brock since he was a little kid kind of go through those phases. Like he was a skater, he was a jock, he wanted to play hockey at one point, he wanted to race motorcycles. Always super busy. We hunt, so he was always into hunting. And then like right before Rob kept texting him like, hey, are you going to wrestle this year? And like right before the wrestling season started, he shot at Rob a text. And he's like, Coach, I'm not going to wrestle this season, but can you teach me how to be a cowboy? And so it was just, he was always looking for the next best thing. Mm-hmm. And he kind of fit in with that group. Unfortunately, I think they are a very loyal group, and the kids he was hanging out with were very welcoming to him. But he was hanging out with kids that weren't really his age either, and I think that was problematic. I mean, he was hanging out with kids that were 20, maybe 25, and so of course
those aren't really kids anymore, right?
Exactly, and so adults. His mental state and their mental state. It's just I was a little concerned about that. Yeah, the common ground was they were going to go ride horses or they were going to go, herd cattle or whatever after school or on the weekends. But the problem I had with that is, okay, that may take 3 or 4 hours, but what happens after that? And that's kind of like where his mom and I were definitely concerned about some of those influences, but
what were you concerned was happening after they did that? Could happen.
Yeah, I mean, if I know when I was 21, before I was 21, I know what I was looking for. My buddies' brothers that would buy me alcohol or whatever else I could get my hands on at that time, and it wasn't necessarily because I was a depressed person looking for a way to cope with it. It was because I just wanted to party.
Yeah, that's what we did.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was very like a little bit loose with him when he turned 16 and not wanting to like corral him and like keep him from doing things. So I kind of would like let the leash off. Like, yeah, we gave him curfews and he was always, but that was the thing. Like he was always home on time. And if we were on him, and he was like already like, Dad, I'm on my way home. I know I was supposed to be home at midnight and it's 12:05. I'll be 10 minutes away. So he was very respectful in that manner. Like he knew his boundaries. But we also kind of like wanted to give him a little bit of a leash and like let him, kind of figure out who he was and trust too. Like you want your kids to trust you and be able to come to you if there was problems. Obviously he didn't, but we were hoping that he would have a little bit of that trust to like come and say, hey, I've got some issues.
So he's hanging out with a new group of guys, herding cattle, drinking beer, maybe.
Possibly, yeah. We're not really sure, but there was no hard evidence of that. But I would assume.
Yeah, and I think that's a worry that any parent has when you're we call that middle adolescent. 14, 15, 16-year-old is starting to hang out with kids that are quite a bit older. We worry that they take on some of those behaviors.
Yeah, and he was extremely responsible. I mean, over the top. He's had a job, like since he could work for somebody, he wanted to work. He got a job last summer working for a company up in Woods Cross. He was helping them like wash semi-trucks. And that was like he would ride his bike to school, we'd pick him up, and then he'd ride down to work, we'd pick him up when he was done. And then as soon as he turned 16, he was like hunting for the next job. And so this summer he was working for a construction company. He would jump in his truck and drive, 100, 200 miles, no problem. Like, we just trusted him. Like, it was like dealing with
It sounds like
25-year-old.
Like it doesn't sound like there were really any real parental red flags that most parents, start to make them really worry. Other than the fact that maybe he was hanging out with some older kids, but even that, we don't know that there were any problems. I mean, here's a kid who is with the curfew thing. Most parents are like, oh, that would be my dream if the kid, came home on time and texted me if he was going to be late and wanted to work. I mean, most parents are having a hard time getting their kids off the video games and out working. It just sounds like there really weren't a lot of red flags, unless were there any that we're not talking about? That's what's
crazy. Like, this is like, he would literally, he struggled with school a little bit. Like, he just wanted to work, and I think he enjoyed the freedom it gave him. Like, after, like, he had money to spend, he bought what he wanted. He was always like, he'd go buy clothes or whatever the case was. He enjoyed the freedom that having a job during the day and then going out and doing what he wanted at night gave him the ability to do. He loved to hunt and fish, so he was always buying new stuff for hunting. I mean, it just gave him, I think, in his mind, that flexibility.
You're listening to Project Recovery. We're talking to Josh. We're hearing the story of his son, Brock, who he lost to suicide a little over a month ago. We're going to find out more about that in just a second. But if you know somebody who needs some help or yourself needs some help, you can call a couple of numbers. There's 877, a new number out there. It'll connect you to someone anonymously right now, or the National Suicide Hotline, which is 1-800-273-8255, or the Safe UT app, which is Safe Utah app. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Project Recovery. So, Josh, by all accounts, Brock, a pretty normal kid, actually excelled in
I was going to say a little exceptional in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and excelled in a lot of areas.
He really did.
What happened?
So, leading up to it, it was pretty normal all summer long. Getting ready to change. He talked about changing high schools this year. Currently at Bountiful High, wanted to go over to Woods Cross, and he had a job Monday through Friday, working construction, and then about a month ago, Brock and I kind of crossed paths. I probably gave him some, I don't know if it was some sort of rule or something that he didn't want to listen to or whatever. And anyways, he and I kind of went like about 10 days that we didn't talk. And I remember he was wanting to get ready to go to a trip in Montana. And it was over like one of my weekends. Again, I'm divorced, so it was over my weekend. And I told his mom, I'm like, we agree on this, but before he goes, we need to talk. Like, he and I need to have this conversation. And his mom and I agreed, like, it was cool that you go. We talked to his girlfriend's parents to go on this trip with them. And but I told my son, I was like, before you leave, you and I need to have a discussion, because he had gone it was about just over a week that we hadn't really discussed.
Is that unusual for you guys?
It was really weird, because I have him every Tuesday, every Thursday. So they're always at my house, but because of his work schedule, there were days that he wouldn't come by, where they normally are at my house overnight. He would get up super early in the morning. Like, he would be at work at like 5 a.m.
Wow.
So yeah, this kid, he was a workhorse. He literally was. So that's the other thing. Like, he did a really good job masking it. He did a really good job hiding that there was actually like some deep problems. So anyways, it was like a Tuesday before he left, Tuesday or Wednesday, to go to Montana. I was able to kind of catch him one night after work, and we were able to go up on the east bench of Bountiful. There's like an overlook at Mueller Park that you kind of see the entire valley. It's like 9:30 at night, and we were able to sit up there on the back of his truck, and it was, knowing now, it was my goodbye talk to him. And I think I would probably be in a lot different state of mind right now if I didn't have that opportunity. we sat back there. His mom had told me that he had, and I think it's just that teenager point in life where they're kind of like starting to rebel a little bit. And he was telling his mom that he doesn't feel like I appreciated his, what he did, or it was like not necessarily respect, but he was a disappointment possibly to me. And, he was, I think, questioning like how I felt about him. So that was my primary goal before he left. It was like I wanted to clear the air, and we sat out back on his truck, and I literally like broke down to him. And I was just like, dude, you have no idea how much you mean to me, how proud of you I am. And just, he was always, because of his work ethic and stuff, that was really important to him. And I told him how impressed I was about his, the way he handled himself at work. And I just really kind of spilled my guts as far as like how I felt to him. So the one thing that like allows me to get through each day is the fact that I told my kid, like, there was nothing left unsaid. I literally like have no doubt that he knew exactly how I felt about him. But anyway, so that happened.
What was his response in that conversation? How did he respond to you on those things? Because a lot of times as dads, either we don't do it or we don't feel comfortable pouring out our heart. You really poured out your heart to him.
Yeah.
How did he receive that?
As I was doing it, we were both sitting on the back of his tailgate, and I like scooted up. We were side by side, and I put my arm around him. And at this point, like, I'm in tears. And of course, his tears started to flow. And one of the questions I asked him is I just straight up said, like, what do you think Dad thinks of you? How do you think your dad perceives you? Do you know that your dad loves you? And he, and your dad is proud of you. And he sat there and he was like, yeah, sometimes. And that's when I proceeded to tell him like how much I actually cared about him. And at the end of the conversation, after the tears dried up, we were both sitting there, and he looked at me. He's like, thanks, Dad. I really appreciated that. So I felt like it was very powerful and very like everything was like let out. We talked about everything, and I thought, okay, he kind of has a grasp. Like, hopefully this, he doesn't have any thoughts that his dad is disappointed in him. So it was, so we went to Montana, came back the following Monday, that is, and then like business as usual. Went back to school or back to work. And then he was getting ready to, so Friday, he went out with his friends that Friday. And then Saturday, he was, had a big day planned with his girlfriend and her family to go up shooting. So they had gone, up in Idaho, like Malad, Idaho, and he was meeting his girlfriend's, mother at her dad's house to drop Brock's truck off. They live up in like by Weber Canyon. And then they were going to ride up to Malad to this ranch. And so they ended up meeting there like early in the morning, like it was like 10 o'clock. Sunday they were supposed to go to Kazi. They were going to go paddle boarding and
cliff jumping. That's what you do in Kazi, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had like an all weekend planned, so he was out with his friends Friday night. Saturday, they were going to go shooting. They went up to Idaho, and his mom shot me a text like Saturday afternoon, and he had, basically it was just, he was lying about a couple things, and that she had busted him on, and I told her, I'm like, hey, I want to talk to you with him when he gets home, and he was planning on going to a barbecue that night, and as they were on their way home, she had talked to him. I guess they were in about Malad. And apparently, like, the group he was with, I've talked to his girlfriend and some other people he was with, like, Brock kind of walked off and had this conversation with his mom, got back in the truck, and on their way home, he just went dead silent. So for about an hour, like, he didn't really say anything. There was zero discussion. When he got out of the truck, there in Layton, North Layton, he looked at his girlfriend and told her, I love you and I'll always be in your heart. And then she looked at him and said, "What? Like, why are you saying that?" And he repeated it to her again. And that was it. At that point, his mom we had a location on his phone. So he was on his way home. We kind of watched the location go off, and I immediately told his mom, I'm like, you need to call the cops right now. Because we kind of knew at this point, he had mentioned suicide like a couple weeks before this. And he and I like had a big discussion. It was probably about a month ago, a month previous to this. In fact, no, it wasn't. It was right when COVID hit. We told him that he wasn't going to go out with his friends. And it was when the governor came out and said, stay safe, stay home. We're done. He had plans to go with his friends that night. And we're like, you're not going out. And he's like, yeah, I am. I'm like, no, you're not. You're staying home. And apparently, and I wasn't there for that discussion, but apparently he told his mom then, like, I should just kill myself, something to that effect. And when I found that out, which was that same day, like when I went to go pick him up, it was a Tuesday afternoon, I addressed it with him then. And I said, are you serious? And it was like one of those things like, okay, is he being dramatic because he can't go out with his friends, or is this like real? And I got in the truck and I addressed it to him like in private. First I did it with his mom and sitting there, and then I did it to him while we were sitting in the truck, and I said, hey, are you serious? And at this point, like I'm emotional, extremely emotional. And I was just like, if you need help, we need to get it right now. And he looked at me dead in the eyes. He's like, no, Dad, I'm good. And so, I want to believe him. So I did.
And that is a common thing kids and people might say when they're really upset. I think, it makes sense that it happened with a restriction, and COVID has been hard on adolescents. I think we're learning to live with it now in a different way, but when it first happened, there were a lot of kids who had a lot of rebellious actions with their parents and got very emotional, very upset. And so I'm not surprised he was upset. But saying, I should just kill myself, or I wish I was dead, unfortunately, those are not that uncommon of statements.
Right.
And as parents, it sounds like the two of you, you and his mom, addressed it, which is great, because a lot of parents will kind of blow that off. So you did what you could do. And
yeah, I mean, point blank, we asked him, like, are you, is this really a concern? And it was like me looking at you in the eyes. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope, we're good. And so anyway, so he got dropped off and told his girlfriend that. And then as he proceeded to drive home, so I was at her house and we were going to talk to him. And by the time he got home, or that he should have been home, he wasn't. And that's when we pulled up his phone. It's like, where is he? And she noticed that his location was turned off of his phone. Mm. So that's when I told her, I'm like, call the cops right now. Let's just find out where this truck is. So cops show up. We give them description of the truck, who he was with. They contacted his girlfriend, and he left his location on for her. Mm. And there were text messages sent. And what like kind of panicked us is he sent his mom a goodbye text right before. He was really pissed off. Basically, we weren't going to let him go to the barbecue that night, and he wanted to be with his girlfriend. And we were like, "Dude, you're coming home," and he freaked out.
And that consequence was set because of the argument he'd had with his mother earlier.
Yeah.
And the things that he was lying about.
Exactly.
I mean,
can we ask about what that was?
No, that's fine. So he had been vaping, and there were cartridges, the little tips, in the laundry, and he was lying about them. She had never seen them. She didn't know what they were, and he kept telling her that it was stuff for work because he was tying rebar, and so he was lying about it, and she busted him. She's like, okay, so this has been going on. She had been finding these things for the last 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
And so that's what she said. Like, she is basically, and I don't know when she was on the phone with him, I don't think that was addressed yet, because I told her, like, let's not bring any of this up. She basically, it was, you're not going to this barbecue that you wanted to go to.
Come home and talk to us about this.
And so I think at that point he kind of figured, like, okay, I'm screwed, I'm busted. Yeah. Whatever is found whatever he was afraid that would come out of that.
But kids will be kids.
Well, and I was going to say, how many parents around the country are dealing with that with their kids right now? Vaping's very widespread, very common.
And it's so easy to hide.
Yeah.
Very easy to hide. And kids, of course, would lie about that.
And once again, we go back to what you said earlier on the podcast, the kids being naive, thinking that if I get busted with this, everything, they over-exaggerate.
It's the end of my world.
It's the end of my world.
Kind of that egocentric point of view, yeah.
So Brock had sent a text to your ex-wife.
Yeah.
Left his location on for his girlfriend.
Yeah. So, and I'm, the text was pretty much like, why are you so pissed off? Why can't I go with my girlfriend? I love her, da-da-da-da-da. This is my last goodbye to you and Dad. And that was it. And as soon as I was sitting there and he didn't know that I was with her, I sent him a message and I was like, hey, are you okay? What's going on? Mom said something about a goodbye text. And I was hoping just to get some sort of reply out of him, like to let me know that he was okay. And I immediately checked his social media, and he had posted something to his girlfriend that said, Cassie, you'll always be in my heart and I love you. Mm. And it was literally like his mom and I were sitting there looking at his social media, and it was like 4 minutes after he posted it. And so we were both trying to get a hold of him, and it was too late. Oh my. Like we knew like literally within, the cops, we couldn't get them there fast enough. When they were there, I took off and I thought, so we didn't have his location at that point, and we kind of gave, okay, so they were going to go kind of start, digging stuff up. And I figured he might go down to where he was working because one of his buddies own their parents own the company that he was working at. And so they have a yard, and one of the older kids stay at the yard. And I thought, okay, he might be headed there. So I took off and was headed down to their house when my ex-wife called, and she said, hey, they've got his location in Centerville. And so I turned back around and I started heading north, and I was driving across Redwood Road there in Bountiful, and the cops called me, and they're like, hey, you need to go back to Angie's house. And I was like, no, I'm going to find my son. And hung up the phone, and I don't know, it felt like hours, but a couple minutes go by and dispatch called me. You need to go back home. And I was like, I'm not going home. I'm going to find Brock. And about 5 minutes later, his mom called me and said, they're not going to talk to us until you come back. And I drove up there, and the cops saw me pulling up the street and walked out. And at that point, I kind of knew that it was over.
What did they say to you? How did they talk to you about
it? He as he walked up to me, he just said, your son's passed away. It was like, he didn't really, there was no conversation. It was like right to the chase. And I kind of knew that, as much as I wanted to deny it in the back of my head, like while I was driving up the street, just with the progress of the phone calls that were made to me. Mm-hmm. When they were telling me that they didn't want me to intervene, I had two thoughts in my head. One is they found him and they're trying to talk him down of whatever he was doing, or two, that they had already found him.
Wow. That is the worst nightmare for a parent, to find that out,
Yeah. Yeah, it was I think every day, it's just I'm going to wake up from it.
And you've got two other boys.
Mm-hmm. Luckily, they weren't. They were with their uncle when that was going down.
I think we should take a break. I'm so appreciative of you stopping by and sharing your story. And we've got more questions and hopefully some more help and resources out there. So stick around. More Project Recovery. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Project Recovery. I think we're all just kind of, I don't even know what to say, you know?
Well, it's a heavy, heavy conversation, and I think the emotion is high also because Josh is sharing a story that's still going on for him right now. This only happened a month ago, and his family suffered a terrible loss. We're also learning a little bit about Brock and what a great kid he was, but also maybe an intense kid, and we're now, after the fact, realizing he was harboring and holding on to a lot of stuff that nobody knew about, or at least didn't know enough about to be able to really help him. And it's it is, like you said before we took a break, it's every parent's worst nightmare.
And I'm imagining somebody's listening to this podcast and they're going, Josh, why would you come on and tell the story? You know,
sure.
Why would you?
Yeah. Honestly, at this point, like when all this kind of settled, and I actually, so it was, that happened Saturday night, like 6:30, and I was actually shocked. Rob had found out by like 10:30, 11, and shot me a text. I've known Rob since high school, and he reached out to me, and I told him thanks, and then it was, I don't know if I reached out to you or you reached out to me, but I went and saw him that Monday. And this was kind of before I had a lot of the details and the gaps filled in. I'm a very analytical person, and it kind of helps me put my own mind at ease. And so I was asking a lot of questions to friends and his girlfriend. And before any of that, like, my first question was why? Like, why? What was so bad in life? And so I went over to Rob's that Monday and sat down, knowing that he's kind of suffered some demons himself, and we had a really good talk. And one of the things that kind of put my mind at ease is the depression and the state of mind that when you're in that kind of dark place, you're not really seeing past that. And you don't think, like, what is this really going to do to everybody else around me? And it's not that big of a problem in the big grand scheme of things. It's, we can work through this. And knowing that, like, there was, and I'm sure that everybody's thoughts are different, but knowing that there was no thought process after that for him kind of made me feel a little bit more at ease of, like, okay, like, it was, there's not X, Y, and Z problems in his life.
Let's give the mic over to Rob, because Rob, I mean, you've been on the podcast multiple times, and you've been suicidal yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, especially when I was a teenager, I felt like such a burden that I was doing the world a favor. And I was thinking about Brock's situation, of that black and white thinking of, girlfriend's not going to be around, I just let my family down, I'm not going to burden anybody anymore. I love you. And we all know the ones that survive that's completely wrong. But in those moments,
you do feel like you're doing people a favor in a way that it's even hard to say that right now. But that mindset is delusional, and you're thinking something that's very inaccurate. But it means it's true to you at that time.
Yeah.
And Rob, you took this extremely hard because you've worked with this kid, and you've worked with a lot of kids. And unfortunately, this isn't the only young man whose funeral you've attended.
No, it's happening too often. I think people feel alone. Families feel alone when their kid, daughter, husband, wife is suffering, and they either don't want to be looked at funny, they don't want to burden anybody else, they think they can handle it, and then they are at the funeral home.
And you called me up 2 days after Brock and were livid, and you were mad, you were angry, and you wanted to shout at the top of mountains. You think there's a real problem going on that we need to address.
Yeah, I think the stigma And the easiest way to look at it is when you break an arm, you go to the doctor, you get a cast, you wear it around town, people even sign it. If you're sick in the head, if you have depression, if you have anxiety, you have to suffer in silence and by yourself when most of the people you're around are feeling the exact same way. And we have to change that, and that needs to change in your home, in your church, in your office, and make that a conversation that we can have so people don't have to call in sick, faking a cough when they're really just high anxiety, thinking about killing themselves. We have the resources. We just need to make that communication a little bit easier and a little bit more normal, because I'd love for anybody that doesn't struggle in life to please call you guys and tell us how that's done, but pretty sure the phone's not going to ring.
Yeah. You know, this summer we had a faculty meeting at the University of Utah where this came up, because there are people that study suicide, and there are colleagues of mine who are actively involved as a major or the only part of what they do to try to understand it. It's a widespread problem, trying to understand it from multiple different points of view, what's going on in the person's neurobiology, what's happening in their life, but also, to your point, Rob, what's happening culturally and in our community. And I think that's a place where everybody can and should resolve right now to make a difference. We need to get over the stigma of mental illness. We need to get over the stigma of suicide. I remember being a kid and hearing from adults that suicide was a selfish thing. And as I've grown up and become a psychologist and worked with kids and unfortunately known people who have committed suicide, I realized that is not what's happening. It isn't selfish. It is a disease of emotion. It's a disease of the mind. And in those moments when somebody really is struggling, they need to be surrounded by people that are compassionate, empathetic, and understanding. And there need to be cultural changes. You mentioned work. In research, national research, we know that the vast majority of sick leave is not taken for physical illnesses. People don't get sick physically as often as they do mentally and emotionally. The vast majority of companies, if they could change their policies, would have people there happy, healthy, and in their seats working if we made a shift. We also know that one of the things that we've seen right here in Utah is that suicide amongst adolescents can spread. When one kid in a community commits suicide, then it spreads to other kids who are on the edge, but also without support, without resources. And so, you know, in our schools, we really need to have a different point of view of how we deal with it and have resources available. But I also like the first thing you said, and that is in your home. So I hope parents who are listening will really dig deep and ask yourself, I'm 48 years old, and I know that I grew up in a great, wonderful, loving community, but still with stigmas about mental illness. And I need to get over I need to dig deep inside of me and say, well, what are my beliefs about mental health, and what are my beliefs about suicide? And I need to address those, because if I'm holding on to stigmas, I'm wrong. And if I'm holding on to stigmas, guess who I'm not going to see who's struggling? Probably my own kids. And we all need to get in and make a at-home change so that can be a conversation that we're having in our home. And as we heard from Josh, having that conversation in your home is not a guarantee that you're not going to be touched by the tragedy of suicide, but it dramatically improves the probability that you're going to get through those times. Yeah,
I know growing up at our age, part of being a man was just handling your business.
Manning up.
And we didn't cry unless a bone was sticking out of the skin. And I think for fathers, a good way to help adjust the household is to learn to be vulnerable, to share your fails, to show them that you can work through things. And I think a lot of men are worried about showing that to people because they'll think it's a weakness. But me and Casey are sitting here as proof that all we do is share our fails. And a lot of people like us.
I'm better at the fails than I was the other stuff.
Right?
You know?
We got a PhD in what not to do.
Yeah.
And you study dudes like us.
Yeah.
You know?
But that's a wonderful point. You talked earlier, Casey, about connection. And when somebody is open and honest and raw and real, and they say, you know what, pal, I know you're 16. Here are my mistakes. Here are my flaws. This is how I've gotten through it. then that naivete in their mind or lack of experience, now you've just taught them, there's a pathway, there are solutions, there are steps. You know, if this guy can do it, if my dad can do it, if my uncle can do it, if my teacher can do it, that may not be the exact same situation I'm in, but it gives me hope. And it actually helps expand their problem-solving abilities, because kids are so in the moment, and everything going on in their little circle of influence is the whole world to them. We have to help them expand their sight beyond that, and one of the ways to do that is teaching them through our own experiences.
Yeah, I just think as parents we get super harsh on our fails and make sure that they don't have those fails, rather than educating them so they, when that does arise in their life, whether it's sex or drugs or drinking or whatever, rather than trying to protect them from that, prepare them for that in hopes that they have all the tools to make the right decisions. Everything that we know as who we are is from our fails. Everything I am, every rule I've made in my life, every parenting rule comes from what I did, and I don't want my daughter to do that. And now I see that, so I try and just prepare her for worst case scenario.
It's a strengthening approach to parenting.
And we can prepare them all we want and do our best to get them ready for battle, but they still are their own individual, and they're going to have their own choices, and they're going to make their own mistakes, and they're not going to do exactly what we wanted them to. I want to say thank you to both of you guys coming down, but I always like to end the podcast on a high note. So I want you to tell me one great thing about Brock.
The kid, I love Brock, and the one thing about Brock, he'd come in. So Josh gave it a little story, but his first season, I don't think he won. Second season, he might have won one time. So to come out from being 1-15 in your career, 1-20 in your career, to even show up and then go, I think he went undefeated, did he? In the season, and he only lost in the championship in the divisionals. Just his sheer determination to keep moving forward. And like, I don't care what sport, if you've ever wrestled, you're on a team, but you are judged individually. You're in tights. Kids are looking at that like people think it's just weird, right? I love it. But for kids to step out there in front of their entire school in a hand-to-hand combat situation and move forward, like, you want to talk about facing fears, dealing with anxieties, dealing with stress, like Brock, he really wanted to find himself, and he was constantly, and he did send me that. He's like, Coach, you have horses, can you teach me how to be a cowboy? And I was like, I appreciate your honesty, let's go ride.
I love it.
So he was really open with me, and just, you know, I know it's very unfortunate, but I know that he's on the other side looking out for us and learning what he didn't hear and continuing his journey. And congratulations, dude.
2 years.
So proud of you.
Wow.
So proud of you. Awesome.
Josh, tell me, what mark do you think Brock left?
Well, two things. I want to address your question you asked a little bit ago. The reason I'm here and the reason I'm willing to talk about this right now, primarily because it is so raw. I don't want anybody that is listening that is in that state, you're not alone, and to reach out. And that, you know, I've lost my son because of this, and if I can help save somebody else's child, that's why I'm sitting here. So there's that question. But as far as my son goes, the kid had a heart. It didn't matter the color of your skin. It didn't matter what you were into. It didn't matter what group or clique you were with. He was open arms. He was open arms to everybody and everyone. And he was like, I mean, sitting here, if he was sitting here, an adult would have a conversation with him and they're like, how old are you?
Old soul.
Yeah. I mean, he was just a good kid. Really good kid.
Well, thank you guys for stopping by. Rob's got something else to say.
One more. He was a defender of the underdog. For sure.
I love that.
Those are my favorite kids.
Yeah. He was a warrior for that.
Brock, this sucks to talk about. You know what I mean? But it needs to be talked about. because it's just.
Why are you glad that we had Josh and Rob on the show today?
I'm glad they were willing to come on and talk about this because it is uncomfortable. It sucks, but it is so important that we have more conversations like that, that we know that it's not just the depressed kids. It's not, I mean, it can happen to anybody and does.
And it does for lots of different reasons. Yeah.
You know, and so if we can open up the conversation and let people know that they are not alone and there are resources out there, you know, that 877 number, the National Suicide Hotline, 1-800-273-8255, the Safe Utah app. I mean, all of those are resources. I mean, I was listening to Josh, and he was talking about for a year his friends knew or had some inkling about it, you know, and they've got to carry that weight around now, and the rippling effect of it just goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, it just makes me mad.
Well, it's so frustrating because we can't. I don't think that suicide is something that will ever be 100% prevented, because there are different reasons why suicide happens. I do know that we can make great strides in helping reduce that number to a very small number in our communities. There's absolutely proof of that when communities come together and work to provide resources. And like Josh said, helping people understand you're not alone. I live in that community where Josh lives, and I hope in our small part of Utah that the conversation is bigger, and that kids going back to school this fall can learn that they need to stand up and speak up and help their buddies who may be struggling. And I guess my kind of parting thought today is, if you look at the evidence here, we had an intense, happy, intelligent kid who was hardworking and had lots of great resources in his life. That should prove to the listeners that depression is a disease. It isn't because we don't have certain things in our life. It isn't because of the things that we typically try to attribute suicide to. Depression is a disease. It changes your perspective, and when it flares up, it can be powerful and dangerous. And so we need to come together and change our minds about what depression is. We need to look for those signs when we can see them, start the conversation, and utilize the resources that are available to us. And if we can overcome that, we will dramatically decrease the number of suicides in our communities. I promise you that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Matt. Thank you, Coach Eastman. Thank you, Josh. And we appreciate you listening to Project Recovery, a KSL podcast.
The contents of this program are for informational purposes only. The program is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, licensed therapist, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay in seeking it because of something you've heard on this program. KSL does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the program. Reliance on any information provided on the program is solely at your own risk.
2 years ago, Americans watched in horror as a crisis unfolded at the Kabul airport.
There's desperation and anguish.
More than 80,000 Afghans have since arrived in America, but this story is still unfolding. I'm Andrea Smartin. In my new podcast, Stranger Becomes Neighbor, we'll find out what happens to these new arrivals in our communities. Who would help our newest neighbors? Follow us at kslpodcast.com, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else you listen.